beautiful day here. Yes, of course. I'm not going to say that over again. It's a beautiful day here in Olympia with all the trees blossoming and everything. And we've got a great lineup of folks tonight. Leading off, we're going to have Cathy Thomas is going to talk about how the earth moves, I believe. And then our featured storyteller is our wonderful Billie Mazzei, who's going to be here. Yes, that's you. You'll be telling. And so just a few housekeeping things. If you have a cell phone, you might put it on mute so you won't be embarrassed like I was last week when I got a cell phone call right in the middle of a story. Let's see, what else? Please keep your videos on so we can see your faces and know whether you're making faces or enjoying the stories as we're telling them. Okay, if you would do that, please. Let's see. Also, this storytelling swap is recorded. Now, if you have a problem with that, just turn off your set and we'll say goodbye. We're gonna do a break at the midpoint of tonight's storytelling for about 10 minutes. And at that point, then you can chat among yourselves on the video all you'd like. But other than that, Bret's not going to allow any chatting going on. So, okay, now we know how the rules are. I think we're going to have a good time. So let's go ahead and get started. Cathy Thomas is going to be our opening teller. And Cathy, we really look forward to hearing your story. We enjoyed hearing your stories at Fanning the Embers this week, which is very successful up at Union. And we're going to do that again next year. So Cathy Thomas.
Well, this is a story that I have wanted to tell you for a long time. I call it, well, actually, Rebecca named it, The Earth Moves. And it's a story that's as old as the earth itself and as fresh as the first time a child has a really great insight. So for me, the story starts on Christmas Day, 1964. And under the tree, there was this big box, and we pulled out of it a globe, a map of the world. Now, my parents had an ulterior motive in giving this present. On one side, it showed Japan, which is where we were living at the time. We were living in Yokohama, which is right by the green section in the middle. But the next year, we were going to go on home leave all the way around the world, which is why the globe, till we came to New Jersey on the far side of the United States. That was my parents' intent. But for me, an 8-year-old jigsaw puzzle enthusiast, I could see it was as plain as could be, that Europe and Africa really fit right in that space between North and South America. Oh. So of course, with great confidence, I pointed this factors my parents may not yet have noticed out. And they said, "Don't be ridiculous. The earth does not move." Well, I lived in Japan, and I knew perfectly well that the earth does go like this during an earthquake or like this during an earthquake. But I have to admit, I'd never heard of Japan sailing out to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So, parents know best. But when I grew up, I went to work for the US Geological Survey. And at that time, they were working on a theory about the earth. And the idea was that ocean bottoms, I get these right, that ocean bottoms were riding on plates or rafts. And so were the continents riding on rafts. And they're riding on rafts over a molten sea of magma. And every once in a while, those rafts get just a little bit apart. And the magma comes up and it solidifies on land as lava. And the crust moves apart just a tiny little bit. And as you know right now, and as you can see on this map, the little red dot up here of Iceland, right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, is spreading open a little bit, thus driving Africa and Europe away from North America. So with this idea that these rafts were riding just mostly together, but occasionally just a little bit apart. And if the Atlantic was widening just a little bit every year, and yet the earth did not turn in over the millions of years that it's been around, has not turned into a pancake by the Atlantic opening up, but instead staying a ball, it must be that the Pacific Ocean is getting just a little bit narrower as the Atlantic expands. So how does that work? Well, these rafts, like if this is the ocean bottom raft, and here is a raft of a continent. Maybe the ocean bottom just slips under very smoothly and you don't even notice this tiny little movement every year. But suppose it gets stuck. So then it's pushing and pushing, and the earth raft wrinkles up a little bit and it rises. But eventually, the pressure keeps going year after year. Eventually, that ocean bottom slides under. And when it slides under, the one for the continent kind of collapses. Well, that rising up and then suddenly going down, that's an earthquake. And what happens on the ocean bottom, which has got a bunch of water on top of it? Well, just like if you had water in a bowl, you move it one way or the other, it sloshes back and forth. It doesn't just slide across like an even piece. So that sloshing is a tsunami. So basically, you can have an earthquake and no tsunami. We had one in New Jersey just this last week. But if you have a tsunami, the theory was you had to have an earthquake first. You had to have an earthquake before a tsunami. Well, of course, right away, the geologists are looking all around the Pacific Ocean to see if there's evidence of this over the years. And of course, the oldest evidence that they have are through stories. And all along the Pacific coast, you have some variation of this kind of a story. It was a dark and stormy night when Thunderbird walked on the ground, and as it stomped, the ground shook. And Thunderbird grabbed Whale up in it with his talons and dropped it. And there was a mighty splash both ways. And of course, after telling such a story, the parents told their children, if the earth shakes, head for higher ground. And what about on the other side of the Pacific? Well, there were stories there too. And you may have actually heard one of these stories. It's called The Wave. Now I'll just give you a synopsis of it. There was an old man, and he lived by a village by the ocean. And behind the village were terraced rice fields. And so one night, he was up surveying his rice field, the rice field that would supply the food for he and his wife, when he felt the earth start to shake. And he looked out to sea, and there was no sea. It was just bare ground. And the village youth running out full of curiosity as to what the ocean bottom looked like. But then he remembered a story his grandfather had told him when he was just a little boy. And the story went that when you feel the earth shake and you look to sea and as the water is receded, run for higher ground because the water is going to come back very fast and could drown you. So there are the village youth heading out to sea. His voice is too weak. The wind is too strong. The distance too far. But then he realizes he has something else. It is nighttime. And if he can set on fire his rice field stalks, that will form a beacon. And without any hesitation and concern for his own income, but more for the village youth, he sets his own field on fire. And the youth, running back, calling their friends, come on, see. Of course, when they look back toward the village, they see the bonfire and they realize that his field is on fire. And their concern for him outweighs their curiosity. And they run back to help him save his field from destruction. And in the process, they save their own lives as well. So there are stories, but of course the geologists wanted data. And so they began mapping tsunamis with earthquakes, tsunami, earthquake. They found tsunamis that went with earthquakes that started in Alaska. There were tsunamis that started with earthquakes to the south in Chile from the Andes. They matched them all, 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, except for one. And the devil in the details was that this is just not an isolated report. This is a well-documented tsunami with 6 reports from multiple situations. January 26, 1700, in Japan, it was a bright sunny day, no storm, nothing. And yet, at midnight that night, at the beginning of January 27th, up in the, let's get this over here where you can see it. There. I get these things so confused. There, okay, there we go. Now, up in the yellow section, from 3 different villages, there are reports to the government asking for help with building materials and food. And the report is that there has been no earthquake, but a high tide, an unusually high tide, has swept away about 10% of the houses in these villages, and the salt water has overrun the vegetable fields and the rice fields. So you've got 3 government reports there. Down in the green section in the middle, we have a record in the shipping records. Here, this captain is trying to explain to his backers that the tide was too high, he couldn't get into the harbor. So he anchored outside the harbor. But the waves were sloshing back and forth, and it pulled the anchor out, and his boat was driven into the cliffs. And 2 of his sailors were killed, and he lost a third of his rice harvest. And then down in the blue section, we have 2 reports from village headmen. And one of them is quite specific. Again, they say no earthquake, but one fellow says, well, I went out about dawn. And you know, between dawn and noon, the water would be unusually high, and then it would sweep out like a fast river, and then it would come back and again. And so even though I didn't feel an earthquake, it was acting like a tsunami. So I sent the old folks and the children to higher ground. Well, with all those reports, they felt certain that a tsunami had occurred. There was no earthquake. Everybody said there's no earthquake. So they called it the orphan tsunami. And it was a mystery. And without being able to prove that a tsunami was preceded by an earthquake, they couldn't really claim that their theory was correct. Well, it's 1980, and I'm at the US Geological Survey, and the Atomic Energy Commission comes to us, and they say, you know, we'd like to build a nuclear reactor on the coast of Washington or Oregon. Would that be okay? And the people at the Geological Survey said, well, in all the years that Europeans have been here with written records, there's no record of an earthquake, but we do know that there's the Cascadia Fault about 30 miles off the shore. But we'll send geologists out there to check further. Well, the geologists looked at the cliffs that go against the Pacific Ocean. And what they found were these long ribbons of vegetation, and then a long ribbon of sand, and vegetation, sand. These ribbons went, some of these ribbons went from California all the way to Canada. Now, and the thought was that the sand was coming from tsunamis. And over a period of 6,000 years, there were about 13 of these really long ribbons, and there were some shorter ones too. But these long ones that would be able to put a tsunami all the way from California to Canada would have required a magnitude 9 or higher earthquake from the Cascadia Fault. And there was no regularity in where these ribbons were placed, so you couldn't tell a date from them. You could just tell that there were that many of them in that time period. But this was not the only evidence they found, because when they got out there, people were saying, well, you know, while you're here, we've got this strange thing. It looks like in a forest of redwoods or cedars that the land has sunk maybe 5 feet and drowned the trees. You remember when I was showing you the picture, the hand motions of the earthquake, and the land is high and then it subsides when the slip goes through. Sounds kind of like this. So they went to those spots, and while cedars decay with water, the redwoods are pretty sturdy. I mean, they're dead, but they've kept their structure. So you could take the snags, the redwood snags, and just plane off the top and look at the rings. And you get a ring for each year that the tree grows. But the width of that ring depends on the climate. And so you have sort of a climate record. And you could compare these rings with rings of trees that were still on land and find out that the whole section had dropped 5 feet at the same time. And further, they could, by comparing the climate record to other records of time, tell exactly when this happened. And they all happened the winter of 1700. So the orphan tsunami had finally found its parent. And needless to say, there is no nuclear reactor on the coast of Washington or Oregon today because the Earth does move.
Thank you, Cathy. Gee, don't you wish you had a science teacher like her when you were in high school?
Really.
And for those of you who want to see some evidence of this, the state parks has a piece of land out by Moclips called the Ghost Forest, which has a lot of dead cedar trees, and those are a result of the 1700 tsunami. So it's good to go out there and look at it. If you go to Ruby Beach too, along the beach, you can see how the earth is folded from the plate shifting. It's kind of scary to think what's down below us, isn't it? So thank you very much, Cathy. And so our next teller is Billie.
No. Oh. Yeah. Sit down. There was a little girl who had a little curl right in the middle of her forehead. And she was good. She was very, very good. And she was bad. She was horrid. My mother used to tell me that all the time. And now I have this little curl. It's going to get cut off tomorrow. Oh, then I don't know who I'll be. However, the story that I have tonight is one that I told the other night, and I have to say, I would prefer it if there were not children listening, because it might cause a lot of confusion in the family. The story goes like this. Little boy came home from school, young boy. Went in, his dad was reading the newspaper. He said to his dad, "Dad, what's fornication?" His dad says, "Go talk to your mother." So he goes in to see his mother. His mother's cooking dinner. He says, "Mama, what's fornication?" She said, "Oh, honey, I'm busy cooking dinner right now. Go upstairs and ask your grandma." So he goes upstairs. Grandma's sitting in her rocking chair. He said, "Grandma, can you tell me what fornication is?"
Tell them somebody's not muted.
Somebody's not muted. So you better get muted or you're never going to know the end of this. So he goes upstairs and his grandma's sitting there in her rocking chair. And he says, "Grandma, Mama sent me up here to ask you about fornication." She said, "Oh, okay. Come over here, Sonny." went over to her closet and she opened her closet door and she said, "You see these dresses here? They're my everyday dresses. The dresses over here are for an occasion."
Thank you, Billy. That's so good. And you know, you're supposed to fill up the rest of the hour with stories, so there you go. So anyway.
Lots of room for other people.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, so. We want to hear some. Anyway, thank you very much for that explanation. So our first storyteller is coming to us from Squim. And John was at Fanning the Embers this year and last year, and he tells these stories about growing up and his mom always saying, "Johnny." And I've got to say his folks had to be the most tolerant parents I think I've ever heard of in this world. So John, why don't you come up and give us a story tonight?
Thank you, Chip. My story has nothing to do with fornication. So, good golly, Miss Molly, Little Richard. I'm walking. Yes, indeed, and I'm talking. That's Domino. Yakety yak, don't talk that. Kosher. Poodle dresses. Bobby socks. Penny loafers. You're right, Billy, 1950s. My brother, well, I wanted a duck's ass. My brother had a duck's ass. All his friends had a duck's ass. When my brother walked down the street, he was cool. He had a duck's ass on his head. He had white t-shirt rolled up so he could see his muscles. I didn't have any, but when I got him, I'd get a white t-shirt too. He had a little tiny thin belt that held up his jeans that were rolled up to show he could see his white socks, and he had pennies in those shoes. I wouldn't have that. I'm gonna have nickels if my mom gave them to me. But I had to learn how to comb a DA. Now a DA is a duck's ass, but just when my brain and I are together, I can say duck's ass. But when grown-ups are around, I have to say DA. Now, really, the only time I've seen a duck's ass is when my brother goes out and shoots one and hangs it by the neck, and it's hanging there, and it's ugly. I don't want to put that on my head. But his is cool. Now, girls have them too, but they're called DTs. Duck tails. Now, girls' heads are different than boys, if you didn't know. Girls have to cut off all their hair to make a DT, where boys have to grow their hair. I'm not having any DTs. I'm going with the DA. It's cool. But I had to figure out how to comb it. One day my brother, Ludnut, was walking through the living room. "Hey, Ludnut." "Yeah." "Would you show me how to comb a DA?" "Yeah, follow me." So we walk into the bathroom. And he looks in the mirror. He always looks in the mirror. You know, when I look in the mirror, I don't look one time, because it's the same face always. It's mine. Why do these people stand and look? It never changes. But he's looking there and smiling and doing this and this. And Ludnut, come on, tell me. Okay, there's 4 things you have to do. 1, you have to get hair. That crew cut is too short. You don't have enough hair for a mosquito's ass. Number 2, you've got to get some grease. Not just any grease, it has to be compatible with water. What's water? Grease. Just get some grease that says water grease. Okay. Number 3, you have to train your hair. When I mean train, he takes out his comb and he goes, oh God, it's beautiful. Oh, that's cool. And he's got a little curl right here. It's so beautiful. It hangs down just a hair. That is training. And once you train it, you don't have to ever worry about it. It'll always be there for you. He looks in the mirror again. What's for? What's for? Just hold on. Number 4, do you have a comb? Uh-uh. Are you gonna use your mom's comb? Uh-huh. Okay, there's one thing. You could not wipe that comb on a towel, any towel. When you're done combing, you wipe that on your pants like this. You got that? Okay, I'll see you in about a month and a half or 2 months because that's how long it's gonna take you. He left the room with me, holding my mouth wide open. My dad said I was always catching flies, but I never caught one. Now, I had to think, how am I gonna get hair? I gotta stay out of my mom's hair so I can get some of my own. A week goes by. A month goes by, a month and a half. Every night I'd go down, look in the mirror, put some water, stay. It doesn't stay. Stay. It doesn't stay. I was getting worried. I was gonna go ask my brother, but he would think I'm stupider than I really am. I didn't go ask him. One night I was sleeping and my eyes opened up. Grease, water grease. After school, I came home, did my homework. That meant I read the Mad magazine. After dinner, I started looking. Now, my brother was always hiding things from me. I found my handkerchief in his back pocket. I knew it was mine because it was white and it was still folded and ironed. See, I never used the handkerchief. I just put it in the back. I used my sleeve because I didn't want my mom to always iron. Well, I went looking down in the basement. I looked all over my dad's work there. I climbed underneath. It was like a light was glowing. There was a can back there, about this high. I grabbed it, put it up on top of the workbench. Standard Oil of California water pump grease. That was it. That was it. I had a water grease. Johnny, it's 8:15. I want you to come upstairs, brush your teeth. I want you in bed by 8:30. Okay, Mom. I grabbed it. Screwdriver, popped that top. Oh, gee, that stuff stunk. Lugnut's head didn't stink. Maybe the air took it all away, but it was purple. Oh, he had black hair and I have white hair. This is not, oh no. Hurry up. Okay, I grabbed a bunch of grease, ran upstairs. Now, we have 2 ways to get into our bathroom. You can go in through my mom and dad's bedroom. That's how Blister, my sister, that's how she always goes. But Lugnut and I go underneath the stairs and go in that way. That way we can always sneak in. And I snuck in. I pulled the mirror over, looked in it, did like he did. Got my comb out, got the comb out, my mom's comb out. Stay. It stayed. Stay. It stayed. Stay. Stay. And I remembered I got to take the finger, the one by the thumb, and put it right down in the middle. I was cool. I was so cool. Johnny, I want in that bathroom. Hurry, I gotta go. That was my sister Blister. She's always bothering me. She's always want to go to the bathroom. Yeah, okay, I'm just getting done. Well, I snuck back out, went up to my bedroom. I didn't tell Blister I left because I wanted her to knock all night. I got into my bedroom and I thought, well, I'm not gonna take my clothes off because I want to be ready for the morning. So I climbed up on the bed. Oh, I did forget to tell you one thing. I wiped my mom's comb on a towel. But I put that towel on my arm, ran upstairs. When I got up to my bed, I pulled the sheets back, put the towel in there because my mother would never look there. climbed up to the bed and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of seagulls. And I think there was a seagull in my room because it was really stinking. I decided I had to go. I threw my legs over the bed and lifted my head, but it didn't come up too quick. I finally got it up and felt the pillow was still attached. I got out of bed and pulled the sheets back and put it with the towel, put that over. Oh, I had two things. But I snuck downstairs, got my boots on, and started walking. Now I walked across Nelson Street, started down Star Hill, and there was a man and a woman. They were all dressed in black, and everybody said they're Russians because she was always behind him by 2 steps, and that's what Russian women do. So I walked by him and said, "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Clark." And they looked at me and their hands went up like this. I guess there's no word for cool in Russia because they didn't say anything except smiled. I kept going. I walked real quietly by the St. Anne's Hospital because there's a quiet sign. I went 2 more blocks and then down a half a block, and that was the school. I could hear the kids all yelling and screaming. My chest was way out there. It was ready to pop all the buttons. I got right to the corner and I listened to them. I stepped out. All the girls went like this. Everybody was quiet. The boys went like this, their hand. And all at the same time, they started pointing and laughing. Mr. Cool wasn't cool. I started crying. I ran to the front of the school, inside, looked into the mirror. Somebody had put a firecracker on top of my head. My hair was going everywhere. It's like they didn't like each other. I ran into the toy and grabbed some toilet paper. Stayed. It stayed, and so did the toilet paper. I ran home as fast as I could. And when I got home, my mom was standing by the sink. There was a scrub brush and a bar of Fell's naphtha soap. She said, "Honey, why don't you take that shirt off and we'll scrub that noggin of yours? But you know, you don't have to be like your brother all the time. I kind of like little Johnny." Well, I walked into the back room, my brain, and said to me, "Let's let that duck keep his duck ass." Thank you.
I think they're still talking about you in Juneau. So anyway, thanks for that story, John. Okay, I think Jerry is the next one up with, he told me what the story was going to be earlier today and I've forgotten all
But I'll
about it.
tell you again.
There you go. Thank you. We'll see if it's the same thing.
Good. Well, we started out with Cathy telling us a story that was based on a lot of science, you know, tectonic plates and that sort of stuff. Mine has nothing to do with science, but it's about a creation story. This is done by the Navajo Nation, and it explains the stars in the sky. So it was a dark, dark night. Coyote put his paw up in front of his face. It was so dark, he couldn't see that paw from front of his skinny little nose. He thought, this will never work. How am I supposed, me and my mischievous friends, supposed to get around at night when we do our best work? He thought for a moment. I'm going to go over to First Man and First Woman, our creator, and ask them if they can help me out. So he finds his way over to First Man and First Woman, and there they are talking. They had done a lot of work. They had just created some mountain ranges, and they were planning on resting. He was listening to the conversation. First Woman said, "I love the way that you put a single peak over there. And the elk that I told you about creating, and the deer, and those birds, especially that bluebird, what a nice touch. Isn't this beautiful over here?" And oh, and First Woman said, "I really like the way you handled the fireworks over there. Kind of looks like a hand. The mountain goats, beautiful wildflowers with all those colors." Coyote Had enough of that chit chat. Hey, first man, first woman. It's so dark at night, me and my friends can't see. First man was kind of taken aback with all of that. Said, wait a minute, Coyote. You and I, we worked on the moon so that you'd have nights, vision at night to be able to see. And then you kind of messed it all up with these moon phases, the months with these months, the irregular days. And not very long ago, the moon came between the sun and the earth. It confused all the animals. Some of the people were delighted, and some of them were absolutely frightened. And now you want more? And first woman said, you know, there's some possibilities here. The first man said, Coyote, go away. Let me think about this. Come back later. Maybe I'll have a plan. So first man thought about this, and first woman had been working on a project to decorate their home. She'd gathered up a bunch of mica stone. Mica's kind of these glassy stones that are kind of bright, and he noticed the reflections off the stone. Some of them were kind of yellowish, some of them were bright white, some of them were kind of blue. He thought, that could be the solution. Maybe I can figure out something, how to do something with this. And first man, he's just quite the planner, very orderly, everything in its place, everything very precise. So he spends a lot of time, gets out his plumb line, gets out his level. Well, he even worked on things like an inch, figuring out what an inch and a foot, even walked off a country mile. He even figured out how much there was to a hop, skip, and a jump, and what spitting distance was. Now, second woman, she said, hey, how about we do a meter, a liter, and some of those? He said, oh no, we've got what we need. Thank you for your suggestion. So he begins to plan. He takes these mica stones, he lays them out, a very nice pattern. Second woman, who's the creative one, she comes over and he asks for her help. Just help me figure out how to do some of this. He said, well, we can create some really fun patterns here. I can put a dipper over here, maybe another shape over here like a bear. Horse, that would be nice too. First man, he liked that. He worked with this project just a little bit more until he got it perfect. This man is quite the planner. So he takes the first stone, he puts it up in the sky. Says, that stone, that star is always going to stay in the same place so that people will know and animals will always know where they are. That star will always stay there. And as things move, everything will move around that star. Like even old curious coyote can find his way around using that star. That sounds like a good plan to me. Then he thinks next, what'll I do? So he takes 7 of the other stars, the stars that first woman had put in place, and he puts them up in place. Then he puts, one of them was a dipper, and he was so happy with that. And she had even figured out how to take those stars, add a few more to it, and make that into the shape of a bear. A bear there, a horse over there, a scorpion. Oh, these are so great. But people can look at those things, they can marvel at them. It'll remind them of stories, remind them of all the things that, all the beauty in the creation. And about this time, Coyote's coming up. Hey, first man, what's taking so long? It's really dark here. My friends and I, we can't play. We can't get out and do these things. First man explains to Coyote, look, these things take time. And he starts to go through the tedious detail of how he planned it, how he could. Coyote said, enough. I'm out of patience with this. And he reaches down, he grabs a handful of those mica stones, throws them up into the air. First man says, stop, wait, Coyote. You can't ruin my plan. But Coyote had none of that. He took the other stones this way, that way, every which way. Oh, they were all in complete disarray. Then he had taken them all, and he was yipping and laughing and just carrying on like coyotes do. And when he was done, there were no stones left. They were all up in the sky, and you could only see a very few of the creations that second woman had put in place. No, they were angry, first woman and first man, but they did notice There was a nice soft light and people could see things. First woman, then she said to the coyote, well, coyote, there's a lot we can learn from you. Mostly how not to do things. Coyote slinks off he goes into the darkness to carry out his impulsive and his impulsive behavior on to plan other things. So that's how the heavens were created, or so it's told.
Thanks, Jerry. Jerry was for the state and also on the National Board of Weights and Measures for many years. So notice he always gets a little bit about inches and centimeters. So, very good. Very good story, Jerry. Thank you. Maggie is our next person up, and she's going to tell us another great story. They're always good. So.
Another story.
Yep.
Okay. I wanted to tell you a Molly Whuppie story. All right. Now, Molly Whuppie was a girl who was a giant hunter. Now, there was the time once when Molly, she beheaded 2 giant brothers. And then there was another time when she escaped the clutches of the big, high, tall, giant woman. And then there was even the time she tricked the giant out of some money. But you know how things go. Those of us who have lived a while, you know how years will go on by, year after year, and then it becomes decade after decade after decade. Well, it seems that even Molly Whuppie done got old. And when she was old, she lived up on Signal Mountain in a little town past Dreamin' Rock. And she was happy up there, well satisfied. She had herself a little yellow house she lived in all by herself, a little yellow house. Yellow was her favorite color. And it had a little creek running along the side and had a red oak tree in the yard. And Molly lived there on her own. But, you know, she found that, well, she just could not keep up that giant fighting business. You know, her body just wasn't up to it anymore. And then young people were coming up in the giant fighting business, and they had their new technologies and their new methodologies and their new philosophies. And you know, that's how it always is. But the upshot of it is they had all the work, and Molly Whuppie, she wasn't getting any work, and so money was kind of tight. But if Molly had 2 nickels to rub together, and if you needed one, she'd give you one. She was just that generous and kind of a person. Well, if you needed a place to stay for the night, or you needed a good hot meal, or you just needed somebody to go and talk to and have them listen to you, well, Molly, she'd take you in and she'd help you out. She'd be sitting there on her front porch, rocking in her rocking chair, and she'd pat the arm of the rocking chair next to her and say, sit down a spell. Let's just spend some time together, and you just rock back and forth with her and just smell that pine scented air and listen to the birds chirp and just breathe back and forth. You'd go. Oh, well, that's the way it was with Molly, you know. And then, you know, so many people would come to visit her. She never was alone, always had plenty of company. And then too, you know, every dog or cat in the whole entire region would come up in the yard, and it didn't matter how mean or mangy they were or how skinny or scraggly they looked. Well, she would talk to them and she'd feed them and pet them. And well, you know, they never would leave, of course. And she had like 20 or 30 dogs around the place and too many cats to count. Well, it happened one night
Molly Whoopi dreamed a dream. Now, in her dream, there was a mule going by the road in front of her house, pulling a cart. And in the cart, there was this big arc of a rainbow. And as it was going by, the mule looked right at her on the front porch, looked her right in the eye, and spoke to her, called her by name, said, Molly Whoopi, go to town and perk up your ears. Well, now at first, when Molly woke up in the morning, she didn't quite remember that dream, but then all of a sudden it came back to her. She had to sit down a while and think about that because, you know, sometimes a dream means something and sometimes it don't. It's hard to tell. But she thought she'd better go into town and hear what she might hear. And so she did. She got herself ready, walked all the way into town, got to the town square, sat on a bench under a shade tree, and she listened. Of course, that's where all the people went to town to shop and all these folks walking around. And she heard people talking. She heard the women. They were all talking about who was getting married, who was having a baby, who died, and who was getting divorced. And then she talked about the men. Oh, the men, they talked about their hunting dogs. They talked about the crops, the weather, and their pickup trucks. Well, but nothing was said out of the usual. She waited there all day long, though, till dusk. And she went, well, that is the last I spend wasting my day. And she stalked on home. But that very night, she dreamed the same dream, the mule and telling her to go to town. Well, when she woke up, she thought she'd better go. She must have missed something. So she went back to town, sat on the bench, listened all day long. All day long, nothing she hadn't heard 100 times before. But still, she waited all day. And at the end of the day, as dusk was coming on, she started walking home, thinking, that's the last day I spend wasting my time like that. But that very night, she had the very same dream. She woke up in the middle of the night, and everybody knows that if you dream 3 dreams 3 nights running, the same thing, you better pay attention. She knew she had to go back to town. So she got up, got herself ready, walked into town, sat there in the town square, listened all day long. Nothing. There wasn't anything unusual happening. Oh, she was just disgusted. At dusk, she gets up and starts walking. But as she's getting to the outskirts of town, she hears somebody rushing up behind her, footsteps running, and hears somebody calling her, ma'am, hold on a minute. And she turned around, and there was a young fella there. She didn't know him, but his hair was slicked back, and he had on a suit and a tie. And he said, ma'am, do you mind if I ask you a question? Go ahead, she said. Well, it's just that I'm a teller in the bank in the town square. And the last 3 days, every time I look out the window, I saw you sitting there. And I just wondered what you were doing. Molly didn't mind telling him. So she explained about the mule in her dream and go there to listen to everybody. And that young fella, he started laughing. He said, now that's the difference between you and me. I dream silly dreams like that all the time, but I don't pay any attention to them. Why, just last night I had a dream. Such a dream of nonsense, you will not believe it. I was in church, but instead of a preacher in the pulpit, there was a cow. And the cow looked right at me and it said, young fella, go out into the country, look for a house painted yellow with the creek running along the side and a big oak tree there, and dig under that tree and you will find a treasure of gold and silver. Well, now that young fella just laughed and laughed. Molly just looked at him, her eyes big and wide, but she didn't say anything. He laughed and he laughed. He said, now, if I followed my dream like that, I'd be running around the county, digging up holes in people's yards. They'd lock me up for a loony. And he laughed and went on, and Molly, she hoofed it back home. Now, of course, it was dark when she got there, but no matter. She went and got her shovel, went and got her lantern. She went underneath her oak tree and she started digging. She dug and she dug and she dug and she hit tree roots. She dug and she dug and she hit rocks. She dug and she dug and old broken crockery, old rusty farm tools, just everything, no treasure, but still she kept on digging. And she dug until clunk, her shovel hit something. And she dug around it, and it was an old wooden chest. And when she finally got it pulled up out of the ground, the wood was so old, it was like falling apart, decaying, because being in that damp ground like that. But when she finally lifted the lid and held up her lantern, the glint of gold and silver. Oh, Molly Whuppie, right then and there, she thanked that dream, foolish dream she had of the mule and all. She thanked that young fella from the bank. She thanked whoever it was had buried that treasure in the ground so long ago. She thanked her lucky stars and the good Lord above. And the next morning, she took a lot of that gold and silver into town, into the bank, to put in her safe deposit box. And that young fella, he saw her and he waved to her and he talked with her about her silly dream, nonsense, foolish dream. And she just smiled and nodded her head. She didn't say anything. Oh, that money that Molly had, the world of good she did with it. It would just make your heart feel so good. She helped out a good lot of people and she enjoyed spending it herself. And you know, if you are ever up there on Signal Mountain and you ever go past that town of Dreamin' Rock and you look for Molly in that house painted yellow with the creek running along the side and the red oak tree, you just go right up on the front porch. She'll be up there rocking and she'll pat the arm of the rocker next to her and say, sit down a spell. I know, because I have done that myself. I have been there to visit her. And I remember talking to her and telling her about my dreams and all. And she said, oh, honey, you follow your dreams. You keep at it, because you never know where they will lead you. I wanted to also say one more thing, that I'm going to tell another Molly Whuppie story next Friday night on Zoom for the Seattle Storytellers Guild. And so you can look up Seattle Storytellers Guild and find their website and click on it, and you can look for next Friday night, April 19th at 7 o'clock, and I'll get to tell stories there.
Well, before you go, can you tell us about, you're going up to swim for Horniak's?
I'm not, but I can tell you about that. Will Horniak, who I have heard before in person and on Zoom, and I've taken his workshops, wonderful, wonderful storyteller, will be telling in Squim this Friday night. And you can look it up. How can you look it up? I sent out an email, but I'll send it out again. But he is a wonderful storyteller. He's telling stories Friday night in Squim, and then Saturday he's giving a workshop.
And those stories are based on Irish stories too, this week, I think.
Irish folktales.
Irish folktales.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Yes. All right.
Well, what would we do if we didn't have Molly Whuppie, right? So I'll tell you what, it's just about a good time for a break. So why don't we take a 10-minute break and then mix around, talk to each other, have a good time, and be back here in about 10 minutes. For those who are new, the restrooms are right around the corner, and
Okey doke.
We also invite people to join South Sound Story Guild. And, or if you just want to give us money, there's a big hat there, you try to fill it up. Thank you. So see you back in 10 minutes. Brett and Annie Coverly are working on a grant process for us. Brett, you wanted any updates on that at all?
Well, I can tell you,
Okay.
can I do it from here?
Sure.
That we have, Annie and I have, Annie does a lot of the work on this, filled out the application, and it's now been submitted to the Inspire Olympia Committee, and they're being considered. We should know in July whether or not we get anything.
Oh, good. Let's see. And I had a note for Maggie to tell us about the Will Horniak's thing on Friday, which you've already done. And then for people that haven't been to Story-Ole, that is, the next one is on Tuesday, April 16th, down at the Brotherhood Tavern on Capitol Way here. And the theme is traditions. Now, if you want to tell a Story-Ole story and you're a little worried about how to do it, professionalteller.com, that's Elizabeth Lord, will have a workshop on May 18th from 2 to 5 for $40 in the afternoon. And she's interesting. And Maggie and I have been to at least one of her story
Yeah.
classes, so it was good. And then she also did a storytelling class for us at Fanning Embers this past week, which I thought was very helpful. So that's good. So let's see, is our 10 minutes up and we need to, close enough. So our next teller, Toby, is going to tell us a story. So come on up, Toby.
Maggie, I gotta tell you about Molly Whoopi. She is my favorite character. And when you said she got old, I went, no, she can't. Oh, stop. Well, here I am flying my kite. And it's just the right season because it's springtime. But let me bring it in carefully because this kite was made by a very special kite maker, famous in all of Lahore, Pakistan, Olfram. Now, Olfram, he makes his kites from paper that is so colorful and a reed that is so supple yet strong that folks from all over Pakistan want a kite from Olfram. Now, it was a very special time too, because Basant is the spring festival in Pakistan for kite flying. So Olfram, he is in his workshop, busy making all kinds of kites, big kites, small kites, colorful kites, kites like dragons. His wife, Bushra, is known to be a very, very famous cook in Lahore. And she is in their hut, busy making chapatis, which is made from wheat dough, unleavened bread, about a disc like a tortilla, and it's grilled on hot fire. And she's making this because, after all, she has to make 500 for the mayor of Lahore's daughter's wedding. So she's very, very busy. Just outside the door of their hut, there is a rat. And this rat in Lahore, about the size of a cat. And it's sniffing around because it smells the delectable chapati. And it sees a crack in the door, nudges its nose in, whiskers go in, and uses its rear end and opens the door wide open, scurries, and goes to the corner of the house. Now, Bushra, she's busy making these chapatis. Olfram, his storeroom is just chock full of kites. He's very popular. He has all these orders. So he has a whole stack, and he needs to bring him into the hut. So I'm going to bring him into the hut, and I'm going to hang him on the wall because I have no more room in my storeroom. Hey, what is this? The door room's open. The door, Bushra, why is the door open? I don't know. I didn't open it. Well, close it. I'm not gonna close it. I didn't open it. Close it. And the two of them just started arguing about this door. Finally, Ophram had enough. Whoever speaks first will need to close that door. Both of them were silent. Bushra went off to the market to do some grocery shopping, and Ophram was sitting in his chair relaxing when on the open door. It was the barber, Mohammed. Assalamu alaikum, Ophram. Silence. Ophram, assalamu alaikum. Silence. The greeting should be the reply, alaikum salam. But Ophram did not say that. Ophram, I am here to give you your Basant spring haircut. How can you be so rude? Ophram was quiet. What kind of a haircut do you want? Nothing. Okay, I'll give you a haircut. And then Muhammad took out his soap and lathered Ophram's head and just started to shave all the hair and then his mustache and his beard. There's your haircut. Gaddafi's, goodbye. And off Muhammad left. Now Bushra came back from the market with her basket and she dropped it. She wanted to scream because of what she saw, this egg-shaped head of Ophram, but she said nothing. Now that night, the two of them were in a deep sleep when they both looked alarmed and saw two thieves going out of their house with stacks of Ophram's kites, and off they went. The two of them looked at each other. So that morning, Ophram had to go into his workshop and make more kites. Bushra, she's busy making her chapatis, making them, and she's quite happy because they're almost done. Well, that night, when the two of them were fast asleep, up on the shelf, bloop, bloop, it was the rat. And the rat looked right and left, and as he did so, that tail whoosh, knocked off a plate and it clattered onto the floor. Bushra looked up. She saw the rat on the shelf. She took her shoe and threw it at that rat. The rat scurried out the open door. The next day, Bushra looked at the nibbled up chapati. She had to go to the market and get more flour to make the chapatis. That open door stayed open. So Bushra, she's busy making the chapatis. Ophram, he has a stack of kites that he needs to bring back into the house to hang. And the rat was being very brazen and brave. It scurried up on top of the shelf, and its tail knocked over a tin cup, which fell into a bowl of oil, which splattered all over the paper on the kites, which then made its way into the cooking fire. Whoosh! A fire went up, and the kites just started to be ablaze. Smoke filled the room. Bushra was stunned. Ophram, meanwhile, he has the kites and he sees the smoke and he goes in, fire. He grabs Bushra by the arm and then takes her out, and they both look at their little house that was on fire. The both of them look at each other and they say together, "Oh." And the hut just ashes. Ephraim said, Inshallah, we will make another hut. Joshua said, Inshallah, Ephraim, you will make more kites, and I will make more chapatis. And the two of them looked, as the only standing thing was a door, which finally closed.
Marriage counseling for them, right? So, okay, our next storyteller is all the way from Walla Walla, which is Rebecca.
Okay. You have to unlock.
Oh, you have to, you do it.
Yes,
Rebecca, are you ready?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, so you got it.
Take it. All right. I'm just really happy to see everybody tonight and be part of Zooming into you. I saw you just over the weekend, and having seen you, I just miss you more. So when I got back home, you know how that always is after you travel, and then you kind of make you make arrangements back with your neighbors, you make connections again and get settled in with your neighbors. And so it was on Tuesday night, just last night, one of the neighbors came over. We have a little fire pit there in the patio and some nice lounge chairs and a bottle of wine, some beer, and we're sitting there visiting about what we had done on our travels. And then I said, so what happened around here in the neighborhood while we were gone? Well, Rodney, our neighbor, he says, well, it's kind of a really weird thing. I kind of embarrassed to even tell you about it. He said, oh, come on, Rodney. I mean, this has got to be good. What happened? What's going on? He says, well, I hate to admit that it really is on me. He says, the little Hutchison kids that live there around the corner of the block. And oh yeah, Hutchisons, they're a really nice family. They got 5 kids. They're just really active. They're always out riding their bikes around in the neighborhood and friendly, always, hi, Miss Rebecca, hi, Mr. Dale, and real chatty and real friendly. And they raise rabbits. They for their 4-H project, these kids raise kind of prize-winning rabbits. And so we all knew that. And Rodney says, yeah, about their rabbits. He said, yeah, we know they raise rabbits. They're really good looking rabbits, pretty rabbits. And he goes, yeah, well, he says, on Monday morning, he said, no, it wasn't Monday morning. I'm sorry. It was on Sunday morning. He says, Sunday morning, I let our dog out to go for a little sniff around the neighborhood because their dog's a good dog and doesn't stray far. And he said, and when the dog came back, Rodney says, the dog had this rabbit in its mouth. Well, and the rabbit was dead. It wasn't moving at all. Rodney says, I looked at that rabbit and I thought, oh my God, how am I going to tell the Hutchisons about this? How do I explain? And he says, I'm really kind of ashamed of myself, he said, but I just didn't have the nerve really to talk to him about it. And so I took that rabbit on Sunday there and I took it into the house. And, there wasn't a mark on it. It wasn't bleeding. It wasn't torn up or anything. And it didn't look like it had gotten run over. And it was just kind of dirty. He says, so I took it in and I shampooed it. I got some shampoo down and I shampooed it out. And then I got down the blow dryer and I I blew dry its hair again, and so it's all nice and fluffy. And so while they were at church on Sunday, I went back over and I put the rabbit back into the hutch because I really couldn't explain to him. He said, I just didn't want him to know what had happened. And he said, I thought, they would just find it and they'd be sad, but it's just how it goes. And I said, oh, Rodney, that's, that's not very honorable, really? You're that kind of guy. I didn't think that of you. You'd do that. Rodney says, well, you know how it is with karma. Everything comes back around you. He says, so there it was on late Sunday afternoon, early evening, the kids are out riding around on their bike and they stopped by and were talking and they said, yeah, Rodney, one of our rabbits died. And Rodney says, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that, kids. That's too bad, but sometimes rabbits are kind of fragile little creatures and sometimes that happens, But Reese, she's a pretty clever girl. She's about 10. And she said, yeah, Rodney, but the really strange thing was that this rabbit died. And then we buried it. It died on Saturday and we buried it there in our yard. But then when we got back home from church on Sunday, that rabbit was back in our hutch. And she said, it's just really weird, Rodney. We couldn't figure it out. I don't know about that. And then, Rodney, you know what? Reese said, you know what was the weirdest thing, Rodney? That rabbit, it was dead. It was dead in the hutch, but its little left paw just kept kind of twitching like this. Nothing else was moving. Just that little paw was just twitching and twitching. Rodney said, well, that is strange, but I've heard of some post-mortem things like that. Maybe that's what's going on. Boy, Reese, I just don't know. And Rodney says, and so I didn't tell him, and I just kind of sent him home and hoped that was the end of everything. But Rodney says, the more that I thought about it, I went inside and I thought, maybe I should talk to him. Maybe I should. He said, and then I went in and I got that bottle of shampoo that I had used to wash up that rabbit. And there, I should have known. I should have thought of it. Right there on that label on the bottle, it says, permanent wave for damaged hairs. And we said, oh, Rodney, you did it to us again. That story, by the way, is in honor of Bruce Bear Whitehouse, who loved to pull us along with a good shaggy dog story. So had to give it to you tonight for Bear.
Yeah, we're missing.
Yep.
And I guess that wasn't water soluble shampoo either, was it? So, I think, okay, let's see if you can top that one. Brett's got a story for us. Is this a wise fool story tonight?
Oh, yes, always.
Oh, good.
Okay. Well, I have two. One's a real short one. One is about Mullah Nasruddin, who one evening is out with his nephew, and they're looking at the sky, and it's very dark. And Mullah Nasruddin says, well, now we have a new moon. And the nephew says, that's great, but what do they do with the old moons? So Mullah Nasruddin thinks for a little bit, and he says, well, it's like your mom does with the old chapati, the old naan. Crumbles it up, throws it in the air, and they become the stars. The other story is about one of my favorite places in the world, little village of Chelm, which is in remote Poland. And the residents of Helm always come up with novel ways of looking at the world. One year they had a terrible winter, and they burned up all their firewood, and they still were cold and miserable and suffering, and they put all of their clothes on that they could and managed to make it through the winter. And they said, well, we don't want to suffer through that again. So here's what we're going to do. They built a wall around the village so that the cold couldn't get in. Well, logical idea. But, you know, in the villages around there, people saw this and they said, maybe the people in Helm, I don't know, something not quite right. Well, one day, one of the citizens of Helm was visiting one of these other neighboring villages, and he was talking to people, and they said, "Oh, you're from Helm, ha ha ha." And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Oh, well, we know about you people." And he was really disturbed by this. He went back to Helm and he told the rabbi, he told the beadle, and he told everybody in the town about this. So they had a meeting. He said, "Why do people from outside have this low opinion of us? Something is wrong. Let's try and figure it out." So they had a meeting, and the meeting lasted for 7 days and 7 nights, and they were all thinking, and their foreheads were all wrinkled like prunes. And finally, one of the wiser members of the community says, I know the problem. It's not that we do silly things. Silly things just happen to us." And they all went, "Ah," and their foreheads became unwrinkled, and they understood that it wasn't them, it was just fate and life. So they said, "Now what are we going to do about this? We have to, fix our image. So we need to tell the people in the surrounding villages, we're not simpletons. It's just the way that the life meets out its little disasters to us." So they said, what we'll do is we'll get one of our bright young people to go to these villages and explain. So how will we choose this person? They decided to have a contest, and they would have each one of the candidates for this job come up and tell how they had solved the problem or why they are wise. And so the mayor of the town called up different young people, and they came and told a story. And Bertholl came up and he said, well, when you have a piece of bread that's buttered and you drop it, it always falls on the buttered side, right? It's kind of like a fact of nature. Well, the other day I was eating some bread and I dropped it and it fell on the other side. And I thought, wow, what's going on? But I realized the butter was on the wrong side. And the judges thought this was a really remarkable observation. So they said, well, can you tell us anything else? He says, yes, I have solved this problem too. Why are the days in summer longer than the days in winter? And everyone turned each other and they looked and they talked and they mentioned, oh, maybe the sun and the moon and all these different things. And Bertholl said, well, the reason is very obvious. In the summertime, it's hot and heat makes things expand. But in the wintertime, it's cold and the days shrink. So that's why they picked Bertholl to go explain why the people of Helm were what they were. And so that's why they have their image today.
All those people in Helm, always good for a good story. So our next teller is Mitch, who's come all the way from Wyoming, although he did come earlier for fanning the embers, so it wasn't just a one-day trip over here this time. So Yeah. There I go. Right here. There you go.
Yeah, I might put a D down.
Right place? I think so.
There you are. Am I too tall, too short?
No,
Just right. You guys are gonna, if you came for a funny story, you're gonna be sad. Well, no, she's funny. It'll be funny. Anyway, so I did. I moved to Wyoming a year ago. And that means I got to start finding new friends and things like that. And I don't know if you've ever been in a small town before, but those people know each other in ways that take lifetimes to build up. And the groups are all close knit, and it's not entirely, they're friendly enough, but there are certainly days when I miss Olympia. And this is kind of about some of that. So one of the things I found over there was every Tuesday night they have a activity called Literary Rug, and it's poetry. And so I've tried a little poetry, and so I'm starting with that today. It's morning again. I don't know what to do with the day again. I'm drowning in should've and could've and would have moments and memories from the past. The thing is, I wasn't this wise then. The dark hole in my heart today is the only way I see any other options now. The new ideas were invisible then, even as obvious as they were now. So it's morning again. I'm still a pain and a bother to some. I do hope I'm giving back again as well. I don't know what else there ever is to do with all of these days. So, I'm a morning person, you might have noticed. And one of my rules for years and years now has been, it's a 3-part rule: get up, get dressed, and get out. Awake is awake. So I was doing this when I lived up on the West Olympia in a little neighborhood about a mile from the McDonald's there. And one day I got really brave and realized I could probably get out a bike. It was warm enough. And so I got out my bike and I made it to that McDonald's. And I was really proud that day. And my bike was sitting there, just bright green bike. It's been on the back, well, it's not right now, but it's been on the back of my car for a while. And I got in, and a friendly face smiled, looked up and smiled at me. And I said hi, and I made my order, and I went and sat kind of near this friendly face. Found out her name was Sandy. And I found that out because Sandy is an extrovert. I think it's clinical. I think she's a clinical extrovert. So she's reading the paper, and I asked, it was my fault. I asked, is there anything interesting? And she proceeded to read me the newspaper. Every little thing that caught her interest. There was, the usual news, a little bit about the weather. And then a really surprising one was she turned out really enjoyed the obituaries. And so that day, there was a 70-year-old woman who died, and she went over all of the different features of that woman's life, all of her successes and whatever showed up in that obituary that day. So it was just fascinating. And then I finally got, I don't know what happened, but I broke in and I said, I biked today. And she said, what, really? You can bike? She was really impressed and amazed, really. And then that clinical extroversion kicked in, and every other customer that walked near us got pointed out my bike outside the window. And she said, that's Mitch's bike. He rode here today. He rode here. And I'll admit, I was actually kind of proud. It was kind of fun it was like having my mom again, just bragging on me like I was the best thing since sliced bread, and or buttered bread if you get it on the right side. So Yeah, here we are. So here we are. It turns out that these notes are not helping me at all. But yeah, so the other thing her clinical extroversion does is it gives her, well, she combines it with this secret power that we talked about. There was one day, it started being a habit, this breakfast thing. I figured out that she was a graduate, a successful graduate of Overeaters Anonymous, and part of her success came from eating on a regular schedule. So Sandy eats at 10 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 7 o'clock every day. A small meal, you know, a measured out meal. And it was great because I finally found out that she had a schedule, and I had a friend, and we would go and chat and sit, and she would read various parts of the newspaper to me, and we would talk about everything. And it was really fun. And then one day she was walking back from the garbage or from ordering. I don't remember where she was, but she was in the lobby there walking, and a kid goes by, and she goes, "Oh, you are just a cutie," and she gives him a big old hug, just walks right up to him and hugs that kid. And she comes and sits down, and I was like, "Yeah, that's the yeah, you know, that's the clinical extrovert going on." But then I was like, "Wait a minute. It's also something else." And I talked to her and I said, "You know what? I'm telling you now about a superpower you have. It's called old woman privilege, old lady privilege." And I said, if I walked up to that kid and tried to give him a hug, parents, strangers, everyone would be on high alert. But with you, they were just like, "Oh, what a sweetie," you know? So, yeah. Another example of that was I asked her one day what she was going to do. She does a lot of swimming classes, and sometimes they're before breakfast and sometimes they're after. And so there was nothing after. And I said, "So what are you going to do today?" And she says, "Oh, it's a nice, beautiful day. I think I'm going to go sit and read a book at the new water park and watch the kids play." And I thought, that's old lady privilege again, because I don't think I would be allowed to sit there that long staring at the kids and reading a book, no matter what the book was. So yeah. So this was really great. You know, even during COVID, we isolated ourselves carefully, but we had been both so careful, and we weren't a risk to each other, that we would go to McDonald's, go through the drive-thru, get our food, and then we would park with our driver's windows facing each other, 6 feet apart, and we would chat, sometimes loudly over the rain, and sometimes you would feel drops of water inside your car that you didn't expect, like on my ankle once. So yeah. And then I moved to Wyoming, and Sandy's one of the things I miss the most about that. And it was when I was feeling sad about that I wrote that poem. And then I finished writing the poem and started working on the story part, and I realized all I really need to do is hope that clinical extroversion is contagious, because I might run into my Wyoming Sandy any day now if I just keep looking.
Thanks, Mitch. Well, I think it's sort of spreading from you too, so I'm sure you'll find somebody there. Thanks for coming, Daniel. We'll see you with a story next time, right? Okay. So I think that's about it for the night, unless there's anybody out there in Zoom wants to raise your hand and tell a story. You see anybody, Brett? How many folks? Lance. So it's great to see you, Lance. We missed you, understand, but it's good to see you here in Zoom. So why don't you go ahead and give us a story?
Okay, well, a couple of things happened recently. Just acts of kindness that have stuck with me. I haven't been able to get them out of my mind, and it just feels nice to share it. Several months ago, Jan, my wife, she had gone to bed before me. It's kind of our routine at night. She goes to bed about 9:30 or 10, and I stay up till 11:30 or 12 or whatever. But I'm sitting in my chair watching television, and I hear a crash, and I mean, it is, there's no question that something bad has happened. She's collapsed. And I go into the bedroom, and she is sick. I mean, she is really sick. It's coming out of this orifice. It's coming out of another orifice that's down farther south. And she is glassed over eyes, and her hands are like this, and she's not responding. And it's like, holy cow. I mean, I thought she was maybe dying. And so I call 911, and they come and do what they do. And I was quite shaken. I wasn't falling apart or but I was very, very concerned. They loaded her up in like a canvas gurney or whatever, and it was a flexible thing, and it looked like a body bag, and she's being taken out of the house, and her head is kind of at one end with her hair hanging off, and she's in rough shape. And I'm a little choked up, and I'm walking alongside, and I'm stroking her forehead, and telling her all those things you tell somebody you love at that moment. And they put her in the back of the ambulance, and they won't let me go in the ambulance. They tell me where I can go. But as they close the door, one of the EMTs, a young woman, she looked at me, and she said, "Do you need a hug?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And she gave me the biggest, sweetest hug that was so helpful. And that was just something that has stayed with me since that happened. And Jan ended up fine. She just had a bad stomach thing going on. And a few days later, she was all back to normal. The other thing that happened, you're going to think we spend all our time in hospitals, but as it turned out, this happened when I normally would have been at Fanning the Embers, but I had some strange, weird thing going on with my body, and I called the consulting nurse at Kaiser Permanente, and they said, she asked questions, and she said, "Well, get into urgent care right now. We'll don't drive, go there. You don't need an ambulance, but just get over there. We want to check you out." So we went into the hospital, checked in, and they have us in the waiting room, and it was pretty crowded. So we sat there for probably 2 hours before they took me in, but I was nodding off. I was just taking a little nap, and there was a very young boy. We found out later he was 18 months old, but he was walking, and just the cutest little guy that you could ever dream of knowing. We watched him just being a little guy and climbing around, and it was with his fun mom and all that. But I had nodded off and fell asleep, and I don't know how long I was out. I'm sitting in the chair, but all of a sudden I'm feeling something in my lap. And this little guy, while I'm sound asleep, had a great big, fluffy, very soft, very large teddy bear. And I wake up to this blue and white teddy bear in my lap, and this adorable 18-month-old kid staring up at me as he's offering this teddy bear. And I can't think of many ways better than that to be woken from a nap. And I broke into a smile. I laughed. Everybody else in the waiting room saw what had happened, and they all started laughing. And it was just that's a memory I will never forget. So just wanted to share that with you.
Thanks, Lance. So good to see you, and glad you and Jan are both okay after your trips to the hospital and everything. So anyway, thank you very much. So I think that's probably a wrap for tonight. Bret, thanks for doing all the tech stuff, and Mitch for bailing us out when we couldn't figure out what we were doing. And thank you, listeners, for coming. Thank you, tellers, for telling your stories. Well, what a variety of stories we had tonight, right? So some true, some maybe not quite so true. And anyway, loved them all. And the next event will be on May 8th. Hooray, hooray for the 8th of May, right? And we'll have Toby and Rupa and Eleanor will be telling stories together. Is there a theme to it or?
Yeah, it's a Mother's Day special.
Okay,
So it's stories about or from our mothers and grandmothers.
okay, good. So good Mother's Day stories. So I think that's it. Anybody have anything to add? If not, we'll close it out. So Brett, how many folks do we have on Zoom tonight?
11.
11, great. Well, thank you all for coming. And it's the one good thing that's come out of the pandemic is we're able to get more people involved in our storytelling. So
Yay. Thank you, Steph.
thank you.
All right.
Yeah, because.
Bye, see you all.
Hey, man.